from Homewood campus and the medical campus in Baltimore for Hopkins. So many of you may have already heard or driven past Morgan State. It's right off Cold Spring Harbor or Cold Spring Lane. And I've been there since August of 2017. And I was really excited when Rashni invited me to present on this topic on writing effective research statements. And I'll kind of give you a little bit of a path of my journey to my position, and then I'll kind of go over the things that I've learned over the years as I crafted mine for my current position, as well as things that I researched the last couple of weeks just to kind of see where the field is now. And so just beforehand, all the slides will be available for you. And then I have actually links of different resources in the presentation that you can use. I also have, I'm not going to share examples of research statements here, but I'm going to share with you a link where you can click and you can look through a bunch of examples online. I dug mine out just to take a look, and it is full of things that I shouldn't have done, and I didn't, I was too embarrassed to share it. Okay, so let me see if I can forward. Okay, so this is me. I'm from a little town in Roscoe, Illinois. Most of you, or probably none of you, have heard of that place. It's a tiny little town almost in Wisconsin. I went to University of Illinois for my undergrad and got my undergraduate degree in molecular biology. And then I moved out to Hershey, Pennsylvania, where I did my graduate work at Penn State University. I met my wife there, and that's her here. And so when I graduated, she is actually a Hopkins alum. She was in the GPP program of the Cell Molecular Developmental Biology program at Hopkins. And so we moved to Baltimore, and I was able to get a postdoctoral research position at the NIH. And that was in the National Institute on Aging with Dr. Michelle Evans, who studies health disparities in Baltimore. So the NIA is in Baltimore. And I was there for just about 3.5 years. And at that point, I was kind of ready to look for a position. I wanted to do some research still, but I also really love teaching and career development. And then a position opened up at Morgan State University that was really ideal for me when it came to balance of research and teaching responsibilities. And so that's where I'm currently at. And we've had a little boy now. So that's the little one that you will probably hear running around in a few minutes. So I know that there are a lot of different backgrounds of discipline that are here today, from like engineering and biology. I think I saw some physics and astronomy. Definitely fields that I love. I'm wearing a master's shirt right now, but I have no idea how those faculty searches go. But I can give you input about your research statement that is generalizable enough from my experience and other things that I've pulled that I think will be helpful, hopefully. I'll share a little bit about how you can tailor your research statement to specific positions that you're applying. You might, as postdocs, may have already started your academic job search. You may have just started your postdoc, but it's never too early to start thinking about your next position and how you can position yourself to get there. And certainly, when you apply for an academic position, there are some things to consider. So I believe this is part of a series, this lecture. So we're going to cover kind of the research statements, but almost always for any faculty position, whether it's a primarily research position at like a Johns Hopkins or a primarily teaching institute like Morgan State, or which is, blossoming into a research institute, or a completely just undergraduate teaching institute where your research is really just part of the laboratories you're teaching. These are the components of your application that are almost always going to be part of the job call. Your cover letter and statement of interest, your CV, a research statement, teaching statement. Sometimes those get combined together, and then references. Sometimes you will also be asked to include a diversity statement, particularly your experience with education of individuals from varied backgrounds, or coming from variety of geographical locations, or how you plan to be inclusive and representative in your work or in your research team, or in the way that you approach equitable learning opportunities. Sometimes, particularly for teaching intensive institutions, you're going to be required to provide, say, teaching recommendations. And that, I'm sorry, teaching recommendations, but also just like examples of your teaching. So if there's a survey or something that your students that you've been a TA for have given input on your teaching potential and your kind of your teaching goals, you might include that. And then some applications call for your transcripts, and that's usually just to verify the degree that you have. It's very rare that anybody would ever look at your grades, undergrad or graduate. Okay. And one tip I'll share right now, and no matter the position, is I highly recommend that you get your application in well before the deadline. So for instance, if you see a job opening, if you're positioning yourself, if you're kind of a couple years in your postdoc now, and you're thinking, okay, in August, jobs usually open in August or September, and you can see job calls opening up all the way into even spring now, once faculty get an idea of what the department budget's going to be like. So for instance, let's say September 1st, a call opens up for a position at Johns Hopkins or University of Maryland. They might give you an application deadline of December 20th, and it'll say full consideration for your position or your application if you're in by December 20th. That's technically true. The committees will probably at least look at your particular application. However, a lot of committees are trying to get their work in early, particularly before the holidays. So it's probably better if you get your application in, say, in October, where you're showing your eagerness to apply, you're showing that you're ahead of the game, and you're more likely to get your full application looked at by the faculty review committee than somebody who presents an application in late November when they've already looked at 200. So getting in early is good. You can't always do that, but I recommend then just kind of keeping an eye on where job postings would be. Nature careers, science careers, higher Chronicles of Higher Education, higher ed jobs. Those job boards almost always have continuously on-rolling filterable searches for faculty positions. You can even go to department websites if there's a school that you're particularly interested in at working at, and keep an eye out on when they post their jobs. And they'll give you all that position. When applications are due, sometimes it's a 3-week window to get your application in. Sometimes it is several months. It just depends. And then you may take a while to hear back. Okay. So let's talk now specifically about the research statement. And I have an asterisk here for one particular reason, which I'll share in a minute. So almost always, when you're putting together your research statement, there are some things that you should be thinking about. You should recap your experience and expertise. Now remember, the research statement probably, depending on the application, is going to be 2 or 3 pages max. So you are going to have to filter out things. You cannot go into extreme depth about your favorite animal model experiment, or extreme depth on an extreme technical depth on a new technique. They want to know about these things, but not in the detail that you would need for a journal in your specific field. It's very likely that people that are reading your field or that are reviewing application aren't necessarily in your field. So it just all kind of depends. I think there's a question. Oh, cool. So recap your experience and expertise. They want to know, who are you? And now some of this is going to come across in the cover letter. So specifically, who are you as a scientist? Who are you as a researcher? Who are you as a potential laboratory principal investigator? And you want to set the tone, and really is, what do you want to find out? Why should they be investing in you? Why should they be hiring you to come and do research in their department and with their students and collaborate with their faculty? So, the reason I put an asterisk of what goes in a research statement is this is very, very preferenced on who you are and what you feel you need to highlight about who you are. What's your uniqueness? What kind of things are you bringing to the table? And so you might spend more time setting the tone than you might be recapping your experience. or you might spend more time recapping your experience that falls into setting the tone. You should try and hit both of these, but the weight at which you do this could be different. Really, though, these two things, 1 and 2, should set up the rest of your statement. And we'll talk later on how to structure some of this. So you want to get these reviewers excited. Why should they care about that? If you want to solve, what types of black holes are at the center of the galaxy, and I'm sure that's already answered, but just as a question, why should they care about that? Why should a reviewer in the Department of Astronomy that doesn't study black holes at all, why should they care about it? Or why should a reviewer that might be in a different department in the college that's on that committee as an external member, why should they care about that if they're in sociology? So it's your job to get them excited, just like it is in a grant application to get a reviewer for funding excited about giving you money to do the work. You need to come across as exciting, passionate, and kind of explore that. You also need to structure this by goals. And so I kind of think of it as short-term goals and long-term goals. You're going to give me money to come and join your department and start my laboratory. How am I going to get established? Am I bringing data with me? Do I have a grant coming with me? Do I have collaborations I can lean on? Do I have, there's a couple things you can think about. I'm sorry, you might be hearing my dog in the background. Long-term goals. What do you want in a career? What is your long-term strategy by joining the department? And we'll get into some specifics to be thinking about the department when it comes to these long-term goals, but you want to become tenured. Everybody that's applying wants to become tenured. But you want to become a leader in this particular therapy. You want to become a leader in this new telescope you're building. You want to become a leader in this new type of engineering best practice. Those are the type of things that can set the tone and get the reviewer excited about what you know and what you can offer the department and what the department might be able to offer you in your job growth. So reviewers do want to see these kind of things in here, that you're thinking long-term. Long-term, everyone wants to get tenure, so that's not something I would technically highlight or be impressed with if I'm reading one of these. But if you want to develop a new social paradigm that the department then becomes a leader in the field on that, those kind of keywords, those kind of outlooks are things that are gonna trigger a reviewer and say, oh, you know what, this is someone that we should really consider. All right. Now, the asterisk that I had up at the top here. This can vary by job as well as personal preference. Again, these are my opinions, and these are my viewpoints. I could be totally wrong, or you could come out of this and be like, you know what, he's a bozo. That's totally fine. I'm not going to be offended. And at the end of this, I provide just some additional resources where really you can at least start looking at these things on your own. And I'll offer up some tips and suggestions on how you can kind of get a template down and then get other people to feedback. Again, I don't know how to write one of these for astronomy or for an engineering department. But these are kind of general things that really cut across all STEM fields. But there might be a specific thing that you really need to highlight for this particular. So again, that's just to take it with a pinch of salt. That I'm not at all a major authority on this. I'm just trying to offer some helpful hints as you get started with this process. And it's a process. You should not be writing a research statement in 1 hour and be ready to submit it. This is something that should take months, not necessarily 24 hours a day, 5 days a week for 2 months to put together, but something that you craft, draft, maybe send out to get 1 or 2 comments on to somebody, and I'll talk about who to do that with. And then think about, maybe I need to evolve this part, or I feel really weak in this area. I'm going to spend the next 2 or 3 months of my career while I'm finishing up my work, strengthening this of my communication or some other skill, and then go back and reassess that in your document. So this is much like a CV and a resume. This is a living document that can be updated, it can be tailored, and it should be changed and tailored for each specific job you're applying. Cookie cutter templates like this are very obvious, and they don't give across that authenticity that you might want. I know I'm talking really fast too, so if there's anything you need me to go over. Okay, so what goes into research? They can and maybe should also have, up to you, some other things. Recapping your experience and expertise, questions like, what experience have I had that make me an ideal gift? What data do I have or will have? What is it that I can bring with me now? It doesn't necessarily have to be funding. In fact, for most people, it won't be funding that you're bringing. You're going to be relying on department funds to get you up and running to get that first grant or get through that first semester of teaching. So it might just be that I have this exciting data, or I've developed this pilot project with my PI as a postdoc, or I have this particular skill set in R that allows me to do this new data analysis. But there should be something that really sets you apart that you can rely on to help you set that tone and get the reviewer excited. So here's what I can bring to the department. You can use that statement. Here's what I can bring, or here's how I can collaborate. Short term, I'm really talking about 1 to 3 years out. What are you going to do to get your lab established, get yourself familiar with the lab, the department, and get out a grant, which is really the bread and butter now of most faculty positions. Now, each job is going to be different. At a primarily teaching institute, you're going to be required to teach more. And so getting a grant to secure tenure is a nice bonus, may not be a requirement. If you're going for a place like Johns Hopkins, 90% of faculty salary for most departments is soft money, so money that's coming from grants. You need to get a grant to stay in that department, and you need to get a grant to get tenure. So depending on the job, your goals should reflect that. In 1 to 3 years out, I will be submitting an R01, or I have an R01 written already, and I would like some help from the department strengthening it before I submit it. Those kind of things. I will start training my first graduate students and postdoc to get this up and running. Long-term goals, within 5 years' time, thinking tenure now, 5 or 6 years, how will I have brought in money? How will I have updated the curriculum of a teaching intensive position? How will I have contributed to the department's investment in me? You can also then talk about your career goals. And I'm helping the department in 5 years, bringing in these grants. I also see that with these 2 papers or these 2 projects that I'm going to outline for you in the research statement, this is how I think that I'll become a leader in the field, or this is my contribution. So a lot of these things can be weaved together. You don't have to have a specific sentence here or here to specify how you're going to help the department 1 year out, but that could be woven in with your goals or your career ideals, or back to your research question or the data you're bringing with. So a lot of this can be woven together, and it really should be, because you have limited space. And we'll talk a little bit again about that in the coming slides. Okay, so here is my super amazing infographic about the research statement, and I just want to bring up some things and highlight between institutes that are primarily teaching, which say Morgan State, or smaller research institutes. Now we're on R2 now, so I'm about 50% teaching, 50% research now. Comparable to say primarily like an R1, a Maryland, Hopkins, Harvard, where you're 80% research, 10% service. You might teach 1 course a year, kind of thing. Your research statement is going to be a little bit different depending on that job. So what kinds of things might you want to weigh? Well, for primarily research positions, you really want to look at your research vision and your project potential. Again, what kind of potential do you have for getting funding? If you have funding, fabulous. You're going to be a very sought after candidate. If you don't have funding, what's your potential to get it? What's your grant writing experience? Have you gotten anything as a postdoc? Have you submitted a grant? You don't need a K award to get a faculty position. You don't need an R0 award to get a faculty position. Does it help? Absolutely. But you don't need one. Just showing that you have the experience, or you've submitted grants, or you have an R1 in development, or an R25, or an R21, or a K award that you've just submitted. Those are all things that are great and show your skill and your expertise in communication and grant funding. What's your collaboration potential? We'll talk a little bit about how to tailor your statement to each department, but who in your department might be able to get off the ground with right away, year 1. Oh, I know that this person in this department is working on this. Well, I can help with that. Or maybe they can help me with my project and we can get a paper out, write a grant together. You might be able to bring that up. Do you have a graduate or postdoctoral training plan? What are your projects for your research, and where might students be able to get in to help you get that work done? You might also identify that if you're applying to, say, an astronomy department. I don't know why I'm on astronomy. I just think it's such a fascinating field. So, you're applying to an astronomy department at Stanford, and you have experience in a certain type of telescope that nobody else in the department knows how to use. That is something you want to highlight, not only in your cover letter, but you want to highlight that in your research, saying, my research is going to be using this type of telescope. I can start helping other faculty answer questions related to their research using this type of technology. And you can use that insert engineering, insert biology technique, insert statistics technique to do that. And so you have to do some research. You need to look at who are the other faculty in that department. What are they doing? Who could you work with? Definitely from a reviewer's perspective, and I'll hit on this a little bit. You might have the most exciting data in the world, but if they can tell from your research statement that you're someone that's not easy to work with, or you don't want to collaborate, or you don't get along with someone for whatever reason in that department, that's a rare situation. But if they come across and say, I don't know if this person is someone that's going to fit well with our department, it doesn't matter how exciting your research is, they may not hire you. So you definitely want to come across as and show evidence of collaboration, of team science, multidisciplinary science. Those are types of things that are really valued now by committees. On the other side, and this is true for any type of, you want to avoid technical jargon. Again, you're going to have people that are not necessarily experts in what you do reviewing your application. So you don't need to get into the weeds on how you're going to do a specific transgenic mouse line and develop it. You might want to say, like, I have the expertise to develop this transgenic mouse, and this mouse is going to help us do A, B, C, and answer this really interesting, important question in medicine. Or I know how to build this telescope, or I know how to build this, laser grid that's going to help me do this. They don't care about how you're going to actually build it. You already had the evidence in your publications and your position that you know how to do this. They're expecting that. They want to know, okay, if you can do it, what are you going to do with it? So you don't need to get super technical. You might not be, these kind of positions may not emphasize undergraduate training or laboratory teaching. You might have to do that at something like at Hopkins. That you don't need to waste your time in the research statement on these kind of things. You really want to hit on these important points here. Now, on the flip side, if we're looking at a primarily teaching position, that's going to change a little bit. The technical jargon you don't want. Funding, probably not going to be as important. And postdoctoral training, not going to be as important. Morgan State doesn't have any postdocs in our college, maybe one. So it's not the priority for the committee to know your postdoctoral training. They want to know, what is your research vision of project potential? We'll come back to this question, can you do the work there in a moment? But what is your undergraduate and graduate mentoring plan? What do the department needs and expertise? Are you bringing in something that there's no class for? So for instance, you might want to take a look at their course catalog and pull in, if you're applying to Stevenson University, just outside Baltimore, and you notice that, you're a biomedical engineer and there's no courses on biomedical engineering. Well, you might want to say in your research statement that in my laboratory, we can integrate the equipment I have into a biomedical engineering class. Or I can teach undergraduates how to do biomedical engineering in an active student learning. And so those kind of things can be sprinkled into your research statement that show the department you're thinking about how are you going to use your research project and your limited research time at a primarily teaching position to train students and get out a paper every other year. So that integration is really important. And some of that is definitely going to come out in your teaching statement for these types of institutes. But the other important thing here is, can you do the work there? A review committee, again, you might have the expertise to cure melanoma or to build the newest telescope. However, the resources at Morgan State, for instance, just aren't there to do that. So it's easy for a committee to read through an application and their research statement has, I'm going to use these 4 animal models that I developed in my postdoc to answer this question on melanoma cancer. And, our animal facilities can't handle all those mice. Or we don't have animal facilities. Or it's a shared core research lab and there aren't that many centrifuges that you're going to rely on. It's very obvious when someone hasn't thought about the resources at that institute. So Can you do the work there? You might have an amazing plan on cancer research, and either you should be applying to R1 institutes, or you haven't realized how you need to tailor that to undergraduate. This is probably the biggest thing I have seen in applications that I've reviewed for from Morgan State, from postdocs and adjunct faculty, is they have really good ideas on how to tackle a particular problem, but they have no concept of the reality of what the resources are at the institute they're applying. This, again, isn't going to be an issue if you're applying to Johns Hopkins. There's going to be mass specs. There's going to be confocal microscopes. There's going to be, Illumina next generation sequencers. They're going to be able to do anything you need, or the faculty are going to have in their labs that you can collaborate with. That's not necessarily the case at an R2 institute or a private undergraduate institute. And you need to reflect that in your research statements. Okay. So there are some components, I would argue, of a well-crafted research statement. So again, some big ticket items. Most likely, you should have some kind of summary opening statement. Could be a paragraph, could be a couple sentences, but you need to get their attention, and you need to get their attention quick. So think of a NSF project summary page or an NIH specific aims page for grants. And if you haven't written those types of things before, I highly recommend you take a look online at resources on how to write a specific aims page for an NIH grant, or how to write a project summary page for an NSF grant. Amazing tips there on how to say a lot with little space, and that's exactly what you need to do for your research statement. But you need to get their attention. Again, for some big positions at, say, Stanford or Hopkins, when I applied at Morgan State, I was told that over 100 people applied. So even at schools that aren't necessarily very competitive research-wise, there are a lot of people applying for these positions. That means that these reviewers are going to be reading a lot of applications. It may be that they only read the first paragraph of your research statement. It may be that they only read the first paragraph of your teaching statement. So if there is a specific point you need to get across, if there is something that cannot wait, it needs to go in that first statement. It needs to go in that first paragraph. Get their attention so that they're compelled to read the rest of your research statement. And this is true for your cover letter, I think, and your teaching statement. But really, if you're going for like a big place like Hopkins or an R1, let's say, they're going to read your research statement because that's what your primarily focus is going to be on with your time commitments. So that first paragraph is key. So get their attention. What are you doing and why? Set that tone. I'm bringing my expertise to your department so I can set up my lab to solve health disparities, or do this, or do that. You don't want to be too vague. You don't want to cure cancer, because it hasn't happened yet. But you're going to try and figure out this mechanism of cancer, or you're going to figure out this that will lead to new clinical therapeutics, whatever your research applies to. So what are you doing and why? If you have a hypothesis that you're going to test, or critical data that you got to get up and talk about, that can go in the statement. Any funding. So again, you don't need funding to get a good job. You don't. The funding is going to be provided, and the resources will be there to help you develop into someone that can get funding for your department. But if you do have a K award, or you do have a fellowship award, or you've earned one, or you wrote a postdoctoral grant that was awarded, that should go up in there. When I was a postdoc on my funded project that I wrote a grant for, yada, yada, yada. So these kind of big ticket items should go in the summary statement. That way, if they skip over the rest of your research statement, and they know, though, that, hey, this is someone we're going to ask to do for an interview, well, then you can get to the other details. So really get their attention. Other things that you can consider, again, and you don't have to do this, but some ways it could be easy to kind of figure out how to structure your first draft, if you haven't written one yet, is kind of structure it: the past, the present, and the future. What have I done? What am I going to do, and where will that lead? And you can see then that, what have I done kind of sets the tone. Maybe what am I going to do sets the tone, but that's, establishing yourself the first year or two. Where will that lead? Tenure, we all hope. That's the unspoken word. We know everyone wants to go for tenure. So where's that going to lead for the department, for your career, for students that you're training? How are these projects going to evolve over time? So you can think about the past, the present, and the future. And really, whether you say these words or answer these questions, your research statement in its entirety should touch on each of these things. Where have you been? Should they care about that? Why should they be bringing your expertise in? What are you going to do with that? And what is that going to lead to? And again, you want to make this as readable and enjoyable as possible. So I referenced specific games pages. Those have been gamed so that they're half-inch margins, no sentence breaks. They get as many words in as possible. You don't want to do that with a research statement. You need to get across as much as you can in 2 pages, but you don't want to make this look like a textbook. And we'll talk a little bit about how you can break up that monotony in a few minutes when we talk about structure, but you do want to make this enjoyable. So again, you don't need to dive into technical jargon here. You can keep it more approachable, that you're going to try and solve this and do this. And if they're interested, then they'll get into your research goals later on in the research stage. So this hook is really important. The summary statement is really probably the most important part of the entire document. Again, some other big ticket items could be funding potential. You already have a grant in submission. You've been awarded a grant. Or if you haven't done that, where are you going to apply? So showing that you've given this thought is important. If I'm doing biomedical research and I start talking about all the NSF grants that I'm going to apply for, one, NSF does not fund any biomedical research. So they're already going to be like, okay, this person's a joker. They haven't really done their basic homework when it comes to grant mechanisms. Or if I'm doing basic research and I'm talking about getting into COVID-19 related health disparities research, well, if you are an astronomer, it's unlikely that you're going to be competitive for that kind of work. So you should be thinking about where you're going to apply. Are there specific foundations that you're familiar with? If you do cardiovascular work or engineering work, maybe the American Heart Association has some good funding that you might be able to apply for. So that's not necessarily something you need to spend a lot of time on, but you can just mention, these organizations have funding that I'm going to go for, or this specific grant I'm keying in on. Or I've noticed at the NIH page, there is a call for funding opportunities related to my work that's due in a year. I'm going to apply for this first as soon as I join the department. That stuff can show them that you're taking this serious, and you are, but this is a more relevant example. Collaboration potential. Who could I work with the department? Who is doing something that's, if you're doing the exact same thing as someone in the department, that's not ideal. But if there's someone that's doing something tangential or looking at it from a different perspective, now you have an opportunity to build some team science. But also, how can I help the department? I know, our language, and I can bring that to these projects. Or I know this new technique in CRISPR, or this new technique in software development that we just published on, and I can use that to help tailor a department or help the department with their research needs. Showing that you're going to benefit from working with the department and they're going to benefit from working with you is a great way in your research statement of showing your collaborative spirit, your team science approach, and how you envision integrating into the department right away. And then training potential. Who is going to help you get this work done? Because you're probably going to be writing grants when you start. Graduate students or postdocs or maybe even undergrads. So a little bit about where their projects are going to fit, and I'll talk about how you can highlight that in a second. You may also want to discuss inclusive practices. You have worked with a diverse group of people, or you're looking in disparities research, or you are part of a committee at school looking at career development and minority representation. But having some kind of a statement, and this is be particularly important if you're applying to say like an HBCU, a historically Black college university like Morgan State, being aware of the culture, being aware of the change in tone when it comes to representation and underrepresentation in STEM research are things that reflect well on your ability to think about important national trends and important shifts in where our fields are going, particularly when it comes to making sure that there's representation. So that's not something that needs to be all throughout your application, but it might be something that adds a little bit of, it's just a little bit there to say like, you're someone that's with it, you're someone that is going to be mindful of these important issues as you pursue your research. So again, make it readable and enjoyable as possible. Don't make it a chore. Don't make this a technical document. Don't, make this read like a to-do list, or make it read like a instruction manual for IKEA furniture. It's not going to get those reviewers past your review summary and statement into the meat and potatoes of what you want. Okay, so if you're thinking about items from the past, some of this we've talked about before, but what have I done? It could be that you've developed a new technique or protocol. You are the only person in the world that knows how to do this, and that could be very exciting, setting that tone in your work. You've initiated new collaborations. When I was an undergrad, or when I was in graduate school, I joined a laboratory that worked with drug metabolism. I didn't know anything about pharmacogenetics. However, when I approached my project, I brought in a new type of, I looked at microRNA regulation of those enzymes. And my boss had no background in that experience. So it was up to me to identify labs at Penn State and elsewhere that we could collaborate with and get the project done. That's experience you can highlight. As a postdoc, I developed this new technique in collaboration with this laboratory that has nothing to do with our field. And this is the type of communication experience I can bring to the department. What have I done? Submitted a grant or received a grant. I have patents or copyrights that are coming with me. Always good stuff to highlight, especially engineers. If you have a patent process design, oh, that's good stuff. That's moneymaker for your department or for your laboratory. So anything that you can show that you're going to generate money, as painful it is for me to say, is a good thing. A lot of these schools are going to invest a lot of money in you. And so being able to show that this long-term investment is going to pay rewards, not only for your own career and your personal interest in these projects, but you're going to bring back money to the department, is a selling point, and just a reality. And particularly now that pretty much every academic institute is going to have a budget shortfall in the next year or two, any way you can show that you can help contribute to the coffers of your department, you should highlight that. Again, doesn't necessarily mean that you're not going to get a job if you can't highlight that. But it is something that if you do have that chip in your pocket, you should play it. Who would I work with? Who have I worked with? So I worked with my postdoc mentor. We are going to continue to collaborate on these projects that I start up. This is important to highlight. It is also an opportunity where you need to make yourself maybe a little distinct from what is going on in your postdoc. I collaborate with my postdoc mentor every day still, but the research angle and approach that I've taken is different than what my postdoc mentor does. That doesn't necessarily should have to be, but that's something that you could highlight a little bit, just so that the reviewers know that you're just not going to be an extension of another laboratory. It's not a big concern. It may not be anything that you even need to include, but it's something that you can think about. What data will come with me? I just finished these pilot experiments. That this data I'm coming with is my preliminary data for my grants and for my manuscripts at this institute. Or I have this technique set up, and now with the equipment at such and such department, I will be able to do these experiments and generate some data right away. So thinking about those short-term goals as they link to what you've done in the past is a way to bridge those two topics. The present. Again, what am I doing now for the department? What's the current outlook of your project? If you have a new technique or protocol, or you have a familiarity bringing in several disciplines together, that's really great for your project and for your field, because you'll be at the forefront of those papers. Who could you work with in the department? Again, I highlighted previously, but that collaborative potential is really important. What equipment do you need to get off and running? Will you be bringing any with you? Probably unlikely as your postdoc, but are there things that you can make use of in the department right away to get your experiments running while you set up your lab? Showing that you've done that research. You may not need to spend a lot of time on this or at all. It's just something, again, that could be a component of your research statement, and it could be something that helps you get off and running. Where will you apply first? I've covered that. Are you part of any consortia or working groups that you can rely on when you start? That might be something that you want to mention that kind of ties into your collaborative potential. And then things to think about for the future. What are the long-term goals of your laboratory? How are your new projects and collaborations develop? How do you see your integration into the department? And why does investing in your research and laboratory matter to the scientific question you're asking? Why is it you that is applying for this position in biomedical engineering? Why are you the one with the expertise that should be hired compared to somebody else? And that is going to be highlighted in the types of things that you've done or the types of things that you're hoping that you can do with the experiences you've had already. So some of this stuff is definitely a kind of a recap of what I mentioned before. Okay, so the last part of my talk before we get into questions is, how do we structure this? I'm not going to show you a specific example, but I'll give you resources to what examples can look like. There is no specific structure. I have seen great research statements chronologically on someone's research path. I've seen them based project by project. That is how actually I did my research statement, or technology by technology. Do you have any exciting preliminary data or great graphical abstracts? So Cell Press, for instance, if you're unfamiliar, do graphical abstracts with every paper, which is a graphic that is the abstract that represents what you found in a paper. One way to do this, let me see if I can find. Okay, so this is from one of my papers, and I'm looking at microRNA. It's a type of RNA. They get processed out of the cell, they go into cytoplasm, they get packaged up, they get released into the bloodstream, and then they go on their merry way. Well, if that's what my interest is when I'm writing a research statement, a way to write your research statement that is eye-opening, is attention-getting, is to have a figure like this in your research statement. It takes up a lot of room, but it can do a lot of things for you. So for instance, research project 1 might be that I'm going to spend time looking at the transcriptional regulation of microRNA, and there are potential postdoc projects here. And based off of my experience in transcriptional regulation, this project is a winner. That leads into project number 2, is how do these get released? As opposed to spending 5 paragraphs listing out all these projects and getting into technical details, you have a nice infographic here that's a quarter of a page, a third of a page, and then project 1, project 2. And you can reference that now in the text that you have more limited space of and say, oh yeah, project 1 is microRNA transcriptional regulation. I'm going to write a grant on this based on my preliminary data, and I can get a graduate student on a project right away with the data I'm bringing in. You have said a lot now in 3 sentences. And for sure, when you interview or do a chalk talk, you're going to have to expand on that. But you don't have to get into the nitty-gritty details in the 2 pages. And you might also say project 3, well, I'm really interested in how these things signal. We know that microRNAs go from tissues of the heart to the brain, and they talk, and we think that when this gets disrupted, there's disease. So my 3rd project that I'm really going to develop and where I see my lab going in 5 years is really going from, okay, we know what's being regulated. Now, where is it going? What is it doing? What's the downstream? That's my pilot project. That's my long-term future funding. That's where I'm putting my career into. Knowing my expertise off these 2 things, I can apply it to thing 3. This is where I might need to hire a postdoc to really come in who's done some of this before and help me lay that groundwork in this new context. So you can structure it around, this could be a project by project. This could be a picture of something you built and now you're doing a technology by technology. You could even do this chronologically. I started here in graduate school. This is my postdoctoral training. And now I'm ready to go into just this for my career. So again, you can play with that. Or if you have an exciting data figure that hasn't gone into a paper yet, might be from a grant you've submitted. Say, hey, look at this data. This is awesome. This is what I'm staking my career on. Maybe a lot to put on one piece of data, but it could be something to really keep them interested. Another thing too is a timeline. This is a really basic bare bones timeline I pulled from one of my grants, but it gives you an appreciation for, I'm thinking project 1 in the first couple of years until I get tenure, or project 2 is really going to take me until tenure. Project 3 is going to take a little bit of time to get up and running, but then that's where my career is going. So a graphic may not be necessary, it may be, but thinking and timelining a little bit might help you focus that down. And it may not even be something that you actually have to explicitly say in your research statement, but it can help frame that. And then, a tip is, again, you remember you're selling yourself and your potential. again, I mentioned this earlier, you may have the most exciting project in the world, but if you can't communicate that and you can't show you'd be a great fit within the department, it's a hard sell. So that's something to really keep in mind, not only for your research statement, but for your entire application. Okay, so how should these data projects be highlighted? I mentioned, tell a story, no jargon, don't get so technical that it gets boring and dry. Again, it's likely someone in your specific field will not be reading this. And again, if you can't communicate your stuff to someone outside your specific field, that's something you should work on for a couple months, is being able to just communicate your science to a more general audience, because that is who's going to be reviewing your applications. And again, any exciting preliminary data can go in there. Okay, other useful tips. Let me just make sure. Okay, so tailor the statement for the job. Is the department old or new? Are they established? They have a bunch of people in the field that they're doing and they're looking to continue. Are they a new job? Are they a new department in bioengineering that they're looking for people to invest in and looking for people that want to stay there for 20 years? You might want to highlight in your summary statement, I'm looking for a permanent home for my career and I want to attach myself to this rising department. What are the funding levels like of other young investigators there? So did they all come in with grant money? That can be looked up online, like NIH Reporter or the NSS Reporter system. You can kind of take a look at, what's their potential for funding. Do you bring a critical skill that's totally lacking in the department? You should highlight that. Does the department have a focus? So Department of Biology in Morgan State, most of us work in health disparities. So you might want to angle your work in that direction if you want to work in that department. Have multiple people read this. So again, draft one, get it to where you're comfortable with it, and then send it to colleagues, send it to other students in your laboratory, your friends, send it to mentors. You can ask your department who is on the faculty search committee for that department, and you approach them and say, look, I know there's no job opening right now, but would you read this? And would this interest you as a research statement? There's a bonus to that, is maybe they would think of you when they open up a department position. But these are the people that are the ones deciding this. So they're the ones that are going to have the best input. Again, talk to your members of the department search committee and willingness to read over. There might even be someone that was newly hired in your department a year or two ago. Go up and ask them, do you mind if I read your research statement or your application for this job as I'm building my application for jobs like it? That is a great way to see what has been successful and what hasn't. And then some examples online. So I'm going to click out of this real quick. So I'm going to stop share real quick, and then I'm going to share a different thing. I'm going to share. Okay, so this is you can find this through the links I put up on. This is from the Washington University Career Center. They have other information here. Some of it I've gone over. Some of it I actually put into my presentation. Some formatting and stuff like that. Again, you're going to find conflicting information, but okay, here, sample researchers. So for science, you can click on some of these links and it will take you to like a sample research statement for ecology and zoology, biology, physics, biostats, engineering and tech, other fields. So I think anthropology is here, linguistics, public health. So these are some additional resources that I'm not going to take my time and go over with, but they can be really helpful. And then also in the list is a rubric. This isn't it, so I haven't picked the right one, but developing a winning research statement. This is all linked in the resources. There is a rubric that I won't take time to find, but it is actually just like a checkbox of different things that you should probably include in your presentation that you can give to somebody, like a department, someone that's reading your presentation, and say, can you read through this and highlight this? It's a good exercise for you to read your statement and see if it highlights that. Let me see if I don't. Oh, are you guys seeing this? I don't know. Hopefully you're seeing this, but the link that's in the document goes right to like a checklist of things that should be in there for layout structure and for science content. And those are things that you can have a reviewer check and see, is it there or not? So that's an option. Okay, let's go back to the PowerPoint. All right. So here's that list. I pulled stuff from Duke, AAAS, UCSF, UPenn, Cornell. Hopkins has a career center. They might have already documents like this. And I'm going to just open up for questions. So again, feel free at any point to email me. This is my email. You can find me on the Morgan website. Or if you like Twitter, I'm at RibblesInTime24. Feel free to send me a tweet and I will message you back or something. Okay, I'll open up the chat box here.
Any questions, you guys, over video? I know there's nothing been in the chat box, but if you're waiting for the end, feel free to turn your video, or you don't have to turn your video on. Turn your audio and ask the question as well.
Yep. So yeah, I'm here to answer anything.
Hello? Can you hear?
Yes, Suhas has a question.
Hi, thank you for a very nice talk. This was very helpful and very structured. Some of my friends tell me that there's going to be almost a complete hiring freeze this cycle. Have you heard of anything, and do you have any thoughts to share on how to get that challenge?